Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you did something you really didn't want to do, taking a risk, not knowing how it was going to turn out? When was the last time? For some of you, it was putting the turkey in the oven this week. You weren't sure how that was going to turn out. Wonder what that is for you. You know, when our kids were younger, we bought a season membership to Dorney Park. Anybody ever been to Dorney Park? It's a big theme park up by Allentown. They have this great water park, and then on the other side, they have all these roller coasters and rides, all the normal theme park stuff. Now, my daughter, who I didn't know was going to be here today, and so I had to apologize that I was using her as an example to start the message. But we went, and my daughter was young. Both my kids were not that old, you can see from this picture. And we would go, and she was not altogether convinced that a roller coaster was a good idea. She liked the ride she liked, didn't really want to do the big ones. And she was convinced, and we didn't really want to scar her for life by saying, no, you have to do these things. Might have wrecked her, then she'd have to unpack all these father wounds later in life. We didn't really want that. But we also wanted to have fun as a family, and so we came up with this deal. We made a bargain. We said, look, every single time we go, you have to try one new ride, right? That's it. We won't bother you or badger you about it. We're not going to make you do it multiple times. We're not going to say, well, you have to do this one and this one, just one. And so we did that, and she did the first one. I can't remember which one it was, and we said, so how'd you like that? She was like, that was pretty good. Okay. Next time, we did a different one, and how did it go? And you know how it goes, right? I'm not sure I want to do this. I said, well, did it work last time? Yes. Okay, well, trust me this time. And they did another ride, and it worked out good. And so by the fifth or sixth time, I could say, look, have we steered you wrong yet? No. Okay, then we can go on this ride. And pretty soon, we had tried them all, and now we could ride everything. But let's be honest. When you are 10 to 11 years old, those are some pretty big risks to take. And so I come back to my first question. What risk have you taken lately? Just curious. How did it turn out? See, we often take risks and then find out on the backside it wasn't as bad as we thought. You ever done this? Where you take a risk and you go, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. In fact, not only was it not so bad, something really cool happened. I got to see this thing over here. I got to experience something new. I got to grow as a person. I can think of so many examples where I took a risk and I was glad I did. But sometimes we take a risk and it doesn't turn out so well. You ever had one of those? We invited that person. We took that job. We had a conversation. And the results were uncomfortable at best, disastrous at worst. My first job out of college, I worked for this company for 10 years. I got discontented because I didn't know how good I had it. And so a friend of mine who had left this company convinced me to come work at this new tech company. I was based out of California. I got to stay on the East Coast. And I thought, well, I'm going to go do this. And I took the job, and within 4 months, the economy crashed. The company crashed. It laid off half of its workforce, maybe 2/3. I had to take a 10% pay cut. The guy that invited me into the role there left, went to a new company, and I was miserable. Couldn't go back. Took a risk. Didn't turn out so well. See, the biggest problem we have when we face risk is we cannot, on this side of risk, know how it's going to turn out. We just don't know. Well, we're in this teaching series, the book of Esther. And if you've been tracking with us, Esther is the story of a young woman who plays this key role in saving her people from destruction, the Jews. And we're looking at this book because it's just so easy for us to get fed up with, why am I in this position? Why am I in the family I'm in? Why am I with this job? Why are these my neighbors? Why am I doing these things? And we can't figure out why God isn't fixing all the problems. Why am I sick? Why can I never be healthy? Why are my finances a mess? And we maybe forget that maybe the school, the job, the neighborhood, the family, the workplace, wherever we're at, that God actually has us there on purpose because He has something for us to do for such a time as this. Now, last week, we saw that God's sovereignty doesn't mean we're not going to have problems, right? We know that God's sovereignty kind of weaves its way through this book, that He's in control. But that doesn't mean we're not going to have problems. There's still going to be problems. But God has a plan in those problems he wants us to engage in. But what happens when engaging in this thing that God is doing is filled with risk? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. Esther chapter 4. So if you're reading in your physical Bible, in your app, on your phone, wherever it is, we're going to be in Esther chapter 4. Chapter 4 in Esther is like the linchpin. It's the fulcrum. It's the chapter that everything this author is writing hinges on this week. And so I'm very excited about this because the author is introducing us to some risks that they're facing even while they're stepping into the plans that God has. So again, a little quick recap. You might be very familiar with the story, but Esther is a young Jewish woman who becomes queen because King Xerxes got mad at his old queen, kicked her out. He has this whole thing where he brings all these women in. She becomes queen. Now she's in the palace, but Mordecai, her uncle, the one who raised her, has this tiff with Haman, an Agagite. We looked last week at the descendant of Saul versus the descendant of the Amalekites. And because he won't bow to him, Haman gets angry. He throws a fit. But rich people with lots of power throw fits differently than we do. And so he thought, I want to destroy Mordecai, and I want to destroy every single person who's a Jew like him. And so if you remember, he convinces the king to issue a decree that on this specific date in the future, anybody was allowed to kill anybody who was a Jew and take their stuff. So if your neighbor had a nicer house and a nicer car and nicer stuff, you could just kill him and take it, and it was all yours. It was a horrible, audacious plan of genocide. Now, the edict went out to the whole country, and the country was a little bit confused, but once they had time to process it, they reacted. And so here's how chapter 4 begins. Whoa, boy, that jumped fast. When Mordecai learned about all that had been done, in other words, he had heard about this decree, he tore his clothes, he put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. If you've ever watched someone grieve in other cultures, a lot of times they make it a big display, like we tend to keep our grief really close. Well, they don't do that. And in this case, Mordecai's like, I'm making sure everybody knows why I'm doing this. So he went out crying with a loud and bitter wail, and he went as far as the gates of the palace. Couldn't go any further because no one was allowed to enter the palace while wearing clothes of mourning. It's like, well, no, this is the palace. Only good stuff happens here. You stay out there. But I'm going to get as close as I can. I'm going to wail. I'm going to mourn. And I'm going to, I'm going to let everybody know that something's going on here. It's interesting, by the way, because the author, once again, doesn't actually tell us. Did you ever wonder why Mordecai might be mourning? Because maybe it's because the Jews are going to die. That's why he's mourning. But do you think maybe he had a sense of personal responsibility? Where he thought, if I had just bowed to Haman like I was supposed to, this wouldn't have happened. This is my fault. This is on me. Maybe there's some guilt there. I don't know. The author doesn't want to tell us that. He wants us to fill in those blanks. But whatever the reason was, he is mourning. And for the rest of the Jewish people, it was no different. The news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, and there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, they wept, they wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. I don't think we can get how serious this was. It's just hard to grasp because this just isn't about people. It's about their children, their grandchildren. Picture your gathering this week as you're sitting with your kids and your grandkids, knowing that there's going to be a date in the next year where anybody who wants to can kill all of them with no repercussions. And they didn't all have the same options. What would you do? Would you run? Not everybody could. They didn't necessarily have the wherewithal to leave. You're in the middle of this whole empire. Where are you going to go? Maybe it was like, well, if we just keep quiet, we like our neighbors like us. Maybe they'll help us, But maybe they'll just stand by and not do anything. Or what about those ones where the neighbors were the ones you have a problem with because they always play their music loud and then you complained and they're like, okay, well, now I'm going to kill you. Right? I don't know. What was going on? What was happening? They were not in a great place. There was chaos. And I think there's a principle here that we want to look at this morning. It's simply this. The world can be a scary unknown that we cannot control. And yet somehow, especially in the Western world, we live with this idea that safety and security is the goal that is the ultimate pursuit. And if you don't believe me, just look back over the last 3 years. When COVID hit, safety, security became the most important thing. Now, I'm not speaking against taking good judgment calls, making precautions. All that stuff is totally normal. But there was this preoccupation that says we have to control our circumstances. There can't be any risk. We have to be safe. And you can see this. All you have to do is watch the ads on your television. And the things they're advertising. I have to be safe. I have to be secure. I have to be safe. And you guys are smart. You know that that is a mirage. Every direction you turn, there are unknowns that are beyond your control. You cannot control it all. You just can't. We take risks every morning. You took risks coming here today for various reasons. And the tragedy when we pursue safety and security is that we end up being paralyzed and we won't take any risks, least of all for the kingdom of God. And we jeopardize, because this is the irony, we think by doing so we're jeopardizing a security that doesn't exist in the first place. The Jews here were going to be annihilated if something doesn't happen. If there's not some intervention somewhere. And we think that's horrible, except we are surrounded by millions of people who are going to be dead in their sins if somebody or something doesn't do something. And that leads us to our second idea, which is every person has a role stepping into that unknown. Every single person. It's very interesting what happens, because it says when Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs, in other words, she has all these servants, they cater to her, she's the queen, came and told her about Mordecai. She was deeply distressed, and she sent clothing to him to replace the burlap. For those of you that have been around church for a while, it's also called sackcloth, right? Whatever you want to call it. But it's that scratchy, gross stuff. He refused it. Then Esther sent for Hathach, and he becomes this key intermediary here. One of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed as her attendant, and she ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why he was mourning. It seems that information didn't flow both directions here, right? She's in the palace. She's in the bubble, right? She is protected. Nothing bad happens in the palace. We don't tell you stuff. In addition, in that culture, she's a woman, so probably not included in the political machinations of the kingdom. And so she doesn't know all this is going on. The people in the palace are kind of insulated from this. All she finds out, because there's some level of connection with Mordecai, she finds out he's mourning. She's like, well, why is he mourning? What are you doing? Like, come on, get up. It's all good. I'll send you. If you don't have clothes, I'll send you clothes. And so she tries to find out what's going on. And what happens then is this conversation by proxy, because they can't have this conversation face to face. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the square in front of the palace gate. And Mordecai told him the whole story, including the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. I think this is interesting because the fact that Mordecai knew all this meant he was connected. He had insight, he had information. Remember, he foiled an assassination plot earlier, so he knew stuff, he knew people, he knew what was going on. And it says he gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of the Jews. So not only does he know about it, he actually has a physical copy, right? And he said, give this, show it to Esther, and explain the situation to her. In other words, I don't want you to make any mistakes, Esther. You have to understand what's going on here. And Esther takes this information. And I think for Esther, there's this growing sense of unease, of, oh, I didn't know that. What does that mean to me? And Mordecai doesn't leave it here, because he says, he also asked Hathach to direct her, tell Esther, to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. But do you remember what Mordecai told Esther when she went in to be queen? He said, don't tell anybody. Don't let them know you're a Jew. And now, it's like he's changed the tune. He said, Esther, you got to get in there. I mean, you got to go talk to the king on our behalf. You got to go and plead for your people. This is your place, Esther. This is your time. You are put here. It's not for anybody else, but it's for you. This happens all the time. Do you know how many times in the years I've been a pastor where someone has called me and said, Pastor, I have this friend or this family member, and they're sick, and they're in their hospital. Can you come and share the good news of Jesus with them and pray with them? Which I'm happy to do, but my question always is, have you done that? I don't know them. I have no relationship with them. You have not only a relationship, you care deeply for them. They know you, they trust you. Do you think that maybe you're there because you're the voice they need to hear? Which is why if you ever ask me to do that, I will certainly go, but you're going to come with me and you'll do most of the talking. So just so you have a heads up. Because that's what's going on here. Mordecai says, there's no one else. There's no one else coming along. You can't invite someone else in here, Esther. This is you. But, and this is what gets us into trouble, fear can actually paralyze us and keep us from taking action. Because Esther is not a dumb girl. She is a smart woman. And so she considers the implications of Mordecai's request. Esther says to Hathach, go back and relay this message to Mordecai. In other words, yeah, you told me to go to the king. Okay, hold on a second. All the king's officials, Mordecai, even you, the people of the provinces, they know that anybody who appeals to the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. In other words, everybody knows this is the rule. I mean, you're telling me to go to the king. If I don't get asked to go to the king and I just walk into the inner room, he can say, okay, I'm going to put you to death, unless he's feeling very generous, right? And then she says, there's a huge personal risk here because the king has not called for me to come for him in a month. So he gave Esther's message to Mordecai. In other words, she said, this is the rule. Unless you think this doesn't apply to me as the queen, I haven't seen my husband in a month. I don't know if he's angry with me. I don't know if he's happy with his other concubines. I don't know if he, is upset with me. I don't know if he still thinks favorable of me. She remembers what happened to the queen before her. And if this guy can fly into a rage and do that, what are the odds he could do that to her? And so she's saying, look, Mordecai, I appreciate the advice, but do you understand what's at stake here? Do you understand what could happen here? So she pushes back a little bit. She's a little hesitant to step out. By the way, this is a completely rational response, right? This is not irrational fear. This totally makes sense. Would you want to go? I wouldn't. And so, and again, the author is great because he doesn't really give us a feel of Esther's underlying reasoning, but you wonder, what is it? Is she just cowardly? Maybe it's just a self-preservation thing, I'm just going to stay quiet. You told me to stay quiet. I'm going to keep to the original advice. I'm just not going to say anything. Then at least I'll be good. Or maybe it was just one of those things where, the wise course of action would be to hold off. I mean, it's only been 30 days. Maybe the king will ask for me in the future. And I'll bring it up then. And after all, come on, Mordecai, it's not like this is going to happen now. We got a whole year. So maybe something else will happen in the meantime. The wise course of action might not be to do this. She has assessed the risk, and going to the king is not her first choice. We don't know why, but she's pushing back. Let me ask you this. How many times have you not done something because of fear? If you're like me, and you're a follower of Jesus, you probably said, that doesn't apply to me. I'm not a fearful person. So let me ask you the question a different way. Have you ever done something because of fear, but you covered it by saying, I just need to pray more and ask God for wisdom? Right? It's a good Christian response. Ooh, that's scary. You know what? I really should talk to God more. We got to seek him for wisdom. Which, by the way, is totally fine sometimes. But I wonder sometimes if we use that as a smokescreen for our fear. And we don't do what we need to do. How many times have you not said something because it would have isolated you from your friends or inconvenienced you? How many times have you not been radically generous because you didn't want to be unwise with your money. But what was really going on, you were a little fearful of what you would have left over. Mordecai, not buying it, right? Remember, he raised Esther. So he pushes back immediately. He's like, no. And he comes back and he says, Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. All right, Esther, I know you think by being quiet and not saying anything, it's all going to be safe for you. Ain't going to happen. You're in danger either now or later. The risk is real. You are in danger whether you think you are or not, and your best avenue is to take the risk and approach the king. And he continues by saying, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other places. I have faith that that's going to happen. But you and your relatives will die. Esther, there's stuff going on here anyway. You don't get to be quiet. Your safety, that control of the unknown, that safety is an illusion. It doesn't exist. Doing nothing does not accomplish what you think it will. Staying silent is not the answer. Playing it safe is not safe. Avoiding risk simply means you miss out on what God wants to do. When we avoid risk by playing it safe, we just miss out. And you know this. Because if I said to you here, tell me, we sat and had a coffee, and I said, tell me the most amazing times where God was engaged in your life. Do you know what you're going to tell me? You're going to tell me stories where you took a risk. Oh yeah, I remember that time we had that building campaign, and man, I pledged more money than I ever thought I could afford. I wasn't even sure how we were going to pay the bills, but God really wanted me to, and so I did. And then God showed up, and He provided, and it was amazing, and I didn't know where the money came from. You know, I felt like God wanted me to go on that mission trip, but I don't even like to fly. I hate Mexican food, so I didn't want to go down there. It was going to be hot. I don't like all the discomfort. I don't sleep well when I'm not at home. But you went anyway. And you came back saying, I met God in ways I never thought I would. When we avoid risk because of fear, all we do is miss out. And then Mordecai adds the line that this entire book is famous for. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. Perhaps. That's why God orchestrated all these things. For this moment in time, with these people, for this conversation. Did you ever think that maybe all your experiences and all the opportunities that God gives you are primarily for others, not you? Maybe we actually don't exist primarily for ourselves. Isn't that an interesting thought? Maybe the entire purpose of your and my existence in this universe is to be helping other people find their way towards Jesus. I wonder what God-given, God-designed, God-ordained opportunities we are missing because we're opting for safety. Bless you. Well, Esther considers all this that Mordecai said and decides, all right, I'm in. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa, in other words, the Jewish community there in the capital city, and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And by the way, those of you that fasted during our recent 40 hours of prayer, you know how this can sharpen your prayers, right? Because you're fasting. And he says, my maids and I will do the same, she says, and then, though it's against the law, I will go in and see the king. If I must die, I must die. And if you're used to the old language, it was, if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther ordered him. There's so much in here that we could talk about. You notice that her decision is still risky. That hasn't changed. Nothing about the risk has changed. But she's thought it through. She's considered and said, no, I'm going to do this. And do you notice that she doesn't do it by herself? She's not a lone ranger. All right, I'm going to go take the risk. She actually involves other people. Hey, gather the community. Pray for me. Fast for me. prayer is implied a little bit in here, but like, go gather, be together. I need it. You do this for me. Because I'm resolving to do what needs to be done. This is a brave, brave woman. And then she makes that statement, like, if I perish, I perish. You know, that's not a fatalistic statement. That's not just like, okay, I'll do it, and if I die, I die. That's not what it means. What she's saying is, I'm going to take the risk, even though I have no idea how it's going to turn out. I don't know the result. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the consequences are going to be. I don't have any special revelation from God in this. I don't have a whole lot of clarity in this decision. I'm just going by my sanctified wisdom, and I'm making a decision because I love my people. And she had to either risk, or she had to run or hide. And she said, I'm going to do it, and if I perish, I perish. And it was the right thing to do. See, safety and security in this life are an illusion. You'll never be able to control everything. You can't control everyone. And the more you try and control things, the less open we will be to God's leading and opportunities in front of us. And every single person here has a role to play in that unknown. The conversation we are to have, the relationships we are supposed to end, the job we are needing to quit, the conversation we're supposed to have, the prayer that we need to publicly offer, the money that we're to give away, that activity we need to stop, that responsibility that we need to pass on to somebody else. It's risky. We don't know the results. We don't know how it's going to turn out. And we need to think, and we need to pray, and we need to consider, and we need to have wisdom, and we need to invite other people in, but then we actually have to do something. And my question that I want you to consider, if we're going to trust God in this, is simply this. What is that statement for you? Right? If I blank, I blank. What is that for you? You know what? I'm going to do that thing, and if I get laughed at, I get laughed at. You know what? I'm going to draw that line in the sand, and if I lose my job, I lose my job. You know what? I'm going to tell that person about Jesus, and if I look foolish, well, I look foolish. You know what? I'm going to try that new thing, and if I fail, I fail. You know what? I'm going to give that money away, and if I end up with less for myself, well, then I'll end up with less for myself. You know what? I'm going to say what I need to say, and if I lose that relationship, then I lose that relationship. Again, it's not fatalistic. It just says, I don't know what's going to happen. Because, my friends, there are Jesus followers all around the world, and you know how they're filling in that blank today? If I get arrested for following Jesus, well then, I get arrested. I'm going to follow Jesus, and if it means I lose my family, well then I lose my family. And there are people today that are meeting to worship God in secret who are saying, if I can find out, I might die. So if I die, I die. We just cannot let fear paralyze us into inaction. Do you know that when the Titanic sank, well, you know the story, you've seen the movie, standing on the front of the ship, 1,500 people lost their lives, right? We know that. But what's interesting is that a lot of those people didn't have to die. There was no need for it. Do you know that most of the lifeboats that left the ship were half full? But what happened was simply this. The people that were in the lifeboats did not want to risk turning around to rescue anybody else because they thought, we will be overwhelmed and so many people will try and get in the boat that we risk tipping over and then all of us will die. So the people that were in the lifeboats and already saved just simply kept going because reaching back to save others would interfere with their own deliverance. And hundreds of people died because those who were already saved didn't want to save others. I wonder how many people will perish if we who are already in the lifeboats decide that the most important thing is us and not them. And I wonder how many disciples will not be made because having fun or being comfortable, safe, and secure is our highest goal. Someone once said, faith is a risky business because you're dealing with something you can't see. It's risky because we don't know what will happen. But in another sense, when we place our trust in the one who controls it all, then maybe risky isn't so risky after all. So perhaps, maybe you were made for such a time as this. This is your risk. This is your place. Perhaps God has you where he does for something amazing.